Hi, I'm Gareth, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how to read chords off a lead sheet. And I've just put together a couple of lines of something that you can see on the screen now. And it's a typical kind of lead sheet where you get a melody and then you get these letters that indicate chords that are put above it. So it's a kind of musical shorthand when we don't put all the notes that you might play on the piano or the guitar or whatever. But the melodic line is there, whether that's a song or whether it's an instrumental line, doesn't really matter. But the chords are given to us in these symbols above the stave. So have a little listen to the two lines that I've written here and see if you can kind of follow the melody, follow the chords. If you want to, you can replay this as many times as you want to, just to see if you can get your ear on what's going on in the melody, what's going on in the chords. And then I'm going to try and break it down and explain things a bit. So this is how this one goes. Okay, not meant to be any fantastic piece of music, it's just there to demonstrate what we're talking about. Now, if we just look below that two lines of melody for a moment, we'll unpack what the various signs and symbols mean, and then we'll go back to the tune and interpret things in the light of. So you can see that a common symbol for ordinary triads, the first example we've got is a C major triad. So C, E, G is a plain chord of C major. So when you've just got a plain C major chord like that, you just write C. Now what you do with that chord is entirely up to you. So you can see that the very first chord of the melody I've written says C. So you could just put a C major triad down in the left hand and play the first two notes and it would fit. Or you can say, okay, now I know what the notes are. The notes are C, E and G. You could arrange it in some other way. You could spread it out like this. So you see what I've done there? I've gone from a bottom C up to a G to an E. Maybe you could also have the chord underneath the melody in the right hand. So you do this. So you can do what you like with it in terms of what we call figuration, you know, how you decorate with notes, either by using notes that belong to the chord or by using things we call passing notes, you know, that come in between notes by step that belong to the chord. So if you were going from C to E to G, you could go C, D, E, or you could go E, F, G, or both. Because it's still outlining that C major chord. So you can elaborate this in whatever way you like, but you're still working with that basic chord of C. So if you wanted an ordinary major chord, there's a chord of C, or here's a chord of D, or E, or F, or F sharp, or A flat. You know, you just use the accidentals that belong to that particular chord, that particular key. Now, when you've got a major chord, it always has what we call a root, a bottom note, a note that's a major third above the root. So E is a major third above C, and you have a perfect fifth. G is a perfect fifth above C. So I've got C, major third, perfect fifth, and that's spelling out the recipe for a major chord. So if I've got a major third and a perfect fifth, well, I've got a major chord. Now have a look at the next chord, which is called C, M. So when you see M, that stands for minor, and it's sometimes written on a lead sheet as C with this little dash, this little hyphen next to it. It means the same thing. So it's a C minor chord. Now what's the difference there? I've got an E flat now instead of an E natural, because in a minor chord above the root you have a minor third and a perfect fifth. So a C major chord would be major third, perfect fifth, C minor chord, minor third, perfect fifth. Major chord, you just write C. If you see C, assume it's major. If you see CM, the M is telling you it's minor, or C dash, also telling you it's C minor. You can also have a diminished chord. So the next one is written as C dim. It's sometimes written as C M, C minor, and then in brackets it will say flat 5 because it's just the same as C minor, but the fifth is flattened. Or sometimes you see the C with a little circle next door to it. So there's 3 different ways in which that might be written. I sort of think it's easier just to see the C dim thing myself, but some people prefer to see C M flat 5 or C with a circle. But this is a diminished chord on C. So this time I've got a minor third and a diminished 5th. So that's the recipe for a diminished chord. Or the last example is an augmented chord on C. It's quite a dramatic chord, that one, isn't it? And you can write this as C aug, or you can write C major sharp 5, all right? So the reason for writing C maj is to make sure that you've basically got the C major chord before you start to think, now I've got to sharpen number 5, just to make that clear. So this comprises a major third and an augmented 5th. All right, so if you get that recipe, if ever you're thinking, oh, I'm not quite sure what's going on here, as long as you can calculate those intervals. And by the way, if you're having trouble with intervals, we've got videos out there that would explain intervals to you. So have a look at those on the Music Matters channel. But as long as you're happy with that, you can see the major chord, major third, perfect 5th. Minor chord, minor third, perfect 5th. Diminished chord, minor third, diminished 5th. Augmented chord, major third, augmented 5th. And above the stave there, you can see the various ways in which they might be written on a lead sheet. Okay, if we go down to the next line, we're going to discover about 7th chords, because sometimes we're living in a world of ordinary triads, but sometimes we're using what's called extended chords when we want to have a root, a third and a 5th, but we might add a 7th to it. In due course, you might go further with this, and certainly in jazz, you'll find many extended chords that might have a 9th in it, or an 11th, or a 13th or something. But the same principle applies. So if you get the thing about the 7ths, you'll begin to see how you could extend that even further. So let's have a look at this first one. So we've got another chord that's built on C, but it's a dominant 7th and it's written as a C7. So I've got my C chord, C, E and G, so that's the same as C major. But now I've put this B flat on the top, which is a minor 7th above the bottom note. So see the major chord, major third, perfect 5th. Now the minor 7th above the bottom. So there's a dominant 7th. Now, even though that's a C chord, a C7 is usually a dominant 7th in the key of F. But, you know, that's in a sense for another video, another day, isn't it? But there's the dominant 7th and we call it C7. Now, say you don't really want to write a dominant 7th because you're not really thinking, I want to use a dominant 7th that goes to a chord of F, but I want to have a C major 7th. The difference being that now I've got a B natural on the top of it instead of a B flat. So do you see what's happening? That B natural is a major 7th above that C at the bottom. So I've got my C major chord again with a major 7th on the top of it. So how do we write that on a lead sheet? Because we want to be careful we make the distinction between a C7 that we just talked about and this major 7. Well, you can write C major 7, that makes it nice and clear, or you can write C with this little triangle on it that means the same thing. So you'll find both of those commonly used. Again, I think if you write C maj 7, that makes it crystal clear to the world. But if you want to use the triangle sign, there it is. And you might find you're bumping into it when you're reading this stuff. Okay, now the next one is a C minor 7. So I've got my C minor chord, C, E flat and G. But now we've got a minor 7th. That B flat's a minor 7th above C. So it's kind of logical to call it C minor 7, okay? Or because we use that little dash when we were talking about the minor, you can write C dash and then 7 because the dash is indicating minor. Okay, starts to hot up a bit. With the next one we get one of these half diminished 7th chords. So this time we've got C, E flat, and I've got a G flat, so that's what I had for the diminished chord on C on the previous line. But now I've added a 7th to it. It's the minor 7th, isn't it? In this case, that B flat. So you can call it a C minor 7, and then you can talk about flat 5, Okay, so that's kind of like, that's the C minor 7, but it's got a flat 5 in it. Instead of that G natural for C minor 7, we've got G flat. Or you can have this C with a circle and a line through it, 7. So that's the half diminished 7. Not to be confused with the last one, which is the diminished 7th. Lots of people get muddled up between the half diminished and the diminished 7th. So what's going on here? Well, it's a diminished 7th and we can call it C dim 7, or we can have C with the 0 and the 7. What have we got now? I've got the diminished chord again, so C, E flat, G flat, but instead of B flat at the top, I've now got a B double flat at the top. Okay, now B double flat could be a bit confusing, but the reason why it's written as a B double flat is that some kind of B is a 7th above C. So if B natural is a major 7th, then B flat is a minor 7th, and B double flat is a diminished 7th, and that's what we're talking about here. So that gives me the diminished 7th. In reality, some people would write A instead of the B flat. The objection to that, sort of from an entirely theoretical point of view, is that if you write some kind of A, it looks like a 6th above C, not a 7th. So kind of technically, I suppose it should be a B double flat, but in terms of playing it, it's the same as A, so you don't need to worry too much about that. So you see you get in these basic chords, the major, minor, diminished and augmented. So you could do that on any note. Doesn't have to be C, of course, it could be any note. And then you've got a little exploration as we start to extend those chords by using 7ths as to how you would deal with those. So you see it's based on the chords that we talked about on the line before, but we're adding 7ths and showing various ways in which that might be done. As I say, you could go on and extend to 9ths, 11ths, 13ths and so on if you want to. But basically that's how it works. And then just briefly, at the bottom you can see a horizontal slash. So I've got D and then I've got this line and then C underneath it. And what that means is you put a chord of D on the top and a chord of C underneath it. So that's D, so it means D major. It's C, so it means C major. And you just put that together. So if you want to have a D major chord and a C major chord at the same time, that's how you would write it. Otherwise it would be quite difficult to notate it. So you might want to live with that if it's not familiar turf, and you might want to have a play around with this on a keyboard or a guitar just to see if you can find all these chords, maybe starting on different notes, and that would really get you underway with it. When we go back to the original lead sheet that we started with, hopefully you can now begin to see some of these chords in there. So I've got sort of, if you like, ordinary basic chords. Like we start off with C, so that's C major. At the beginning of bar 3, measure 3, I've got F, so that's just F major. And you can see on the second line, we've got a C chord in bar 6, measure 6. We've got a G chord later in that bar or measure. We've got a C chord at the end. So they're kind of ordinary major chords. We've also got some minor chords. So beginning of bar 2, do you see AM? So that's an A minor chord. So you've got to think, well, it's based on A. It's going to have a minor third above A, which is C. And then it's going to have E, the perfect fifth above it. And so there's an example of a minor chord. I've also tried to include some of these extended chords, so you can see there are quite a few 7th chords around. And just to add to the fun, I've also just thrown in a 9th chord. So can you see at the end of bar 3 or measure 3, there's a D9 chord. So, you know, what would that mean? D9 would be D, F sharp, A. That's the basic D major chord. A 7th is then C, and the 9th is then E. So there's a D9 chord. So you see how this chord extension principle works. I've also got a couple of diminished chords in there, so you can just think, oh, what's going on here? And in this case, I'm using diminished 7ths. So you can see that's the kind of last chord in our lineup of the 7th chords, just to kind of show us what's going on there. You'll also notice that we've got something called slash chords. So for example, if you look at the very second chord, so this is the first bar, the first measure, it says G slash B. What that means is it's the chord of G, so that's G, B and D, but it means that the composer wants B to be at the bottom of the chord. So the lowest sounding note of the chord should be B. So normally if you saw a G chord, well, you'd have G at the bottom of it. But if you see a G chord and you've got G/B, then you've got to put B at the bottom. So that's all that means. So the chord comes first, and then after the slash, it's telling you what the bass note should be. Okay, so if we work through this, I've got a chord of C, so that's C, E, G. Then I've got a chord of G, so that's G, B, D, but I've got B in the bass because of the slash chord. Then I've got an A minor chord, so that's A, C, E. Then I've got a chord of C, but G's in the bass, so C, E, G, but G in the bass. Then I've got an ordinary chord of F, F major, F, A, C. Then I've got a chord of C, so C, E, G, but it's a slash chord, so I've got E in the bass. Then I've got this D9 chord we talked about. So there's the D major, D, F sharp, A, with a 7th, which is C, plus the 9th, which is E. Then I've got a G7 chord. So what have I got here? I've got a G chord, G, B, D, and I've shoved a 7th on the top of it, which is F. Now then, C sharp, diminished 7th. So I've got my C sharp on the bottom, and I'm building up this chord, C sharp to E, okay, that's a minor third, and C, and then going up to G, so that's the diminished 5th above C sharp, and then I've put a 7th on it. So because it's a diminished 7th, you see why that's a B flat. And then I've got a D minor chord, so that's D, F, A. Then a G chord, but with B in the bass, so we've met one of them before. Then we've got a C chord that we met before. Here's another crack at these diminished 7th chords. F sharp diminished 7th. So I've got F sharp, A, C, E flat. E flat happens to be in the tune, which is quite handy, but there's the rest of the chord. Then an ordinary G chord. Then a C/E chord. We met one of them before. But then notice how this progresses. C minor / E flat. So C minor, C, E flat, G, but put the E flat in the bass. Then here's a D7 chord coming up, so D, F sharp, A, C. And then a G7, G, B, D, F. And then an ordinary C chord to finish. So you see how we get to the chords. If this is familiar to you, you'll be straight onto it. If you've been puzzling about how to read a lead sheet, and people have been asking us about this for quite some time, hopefully by working through this video and living with it, you'll get the idea. You probably want to spend plenty of time with the triads and the 7th chords and so on, but then maybe work through this example to see how you get there. And you might just start off by doing a very basic thing with the chords, just get the chords in the left hand. That doesn't sound terribly wonderful if you just go clonking chords down like that. It's when you get familiar with those chords and then you think, actually, I'm feeling a bit free now to kind of decorate around using those chords. Then you get something that sounds a bit more musical. Suddenly it sounds a bit more like a piece of music then, doesn't it? But in a sense, what we're doing there is icing the cake. And what this video is fundamentally about is actually how do we make the cake? So we need to know what these chord symbols mean, how to find them. And then when we do that, we can put the icing on the cake by the way that we decorate it and make it sound musically interesting. So if you're someone who does work with a lead sheet, but you've had a few questions about what some of these symbols mean, I hope that helps to clarify things a bit. If this is something that fascinates you, but you're completely new to it, as I say, live with it for a while and you'll soon get going with it and probably enjoy that. And some people live in a world of lead sheets where you've just got a melodic line and you've got these chords. How do you find the chords? Hopefully we've made a start on explaining how to do it, and you can have hours and hours of fun reading off a lead sheet.